Welcome to Save As Ability, a podcast to educate and inform you about disability employment issues. My name is David Darkangelo, and I'm your disability policy expert.
Welcome back to another episode of Save As Ability. Great to be back with you. Today we're talking about how to not limit work. We're going to reference the report that came out this past fall from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that was sponsored by the Office of Disability Employment Policy. It's a good report. So we'll get right into it. But before we get right into it, I do want to give everybody a little bit of a heads up and disclose to you, because you know how we are here and Save As Ability. We like to do what we advocate for. And, you see I'm wearing glasses today. It's because I've had a loss of vision because of some hemorrhaging I have going on. And so I really can't see as well as I typically do. I'm legally blind to begin with, but now I probably constitute as pretty close to fully blind. I should probably have a cane right now, but we're working through it. So that's the reason for the glasses. Now, if I was working with you, by the way, would that be appropriate for you to maybe we'll do a whole episode on that, about how to broach those types of subjects. But we're going to get right into this report here. We've had this in the queue for, a couple of weeks, actually before the holidays. We're taping this now. It's early. We're recording here in early January. And I had first looked at this report back when it originally came out and then spent some more time on it. I think it originally came out early October, or maybe like the last day of September of 25. And I looked at it, but then I went back and I kind of studied it a little bit and read through it a little bit more before the holidays. And we were trying to do an episode, but anyways, we're doing it now. And so this is based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics released, which is people with health conditions or difficulties that limit work. All right. And so the information was obtained from the July 2024 disability supplement to the current population survey. All right. So it's a little different than the data we typically reference, and we'll get into that a little. But the CPS is the monthly survey of about 60,000 households that provides statistics on data for employment and unemployment in the United States. Okay. So it's really pretty accurate because it's monthly, it's longitudinal, they've been doing it for years, reaches a large amount of households. The July supplement was sponsored by the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy and their Chief Evaluation Office. And it collected information from people ages 16 to 75 with a work-limiting health condition or difficulty. All right. So already you can see that it's a little bit different than the data that we typically reference, which is 16 to 64. All right. But that's okay. It's might not be totally apples to apples, but it's like a Macintosh apple to like a Cortland apple. Okay. So it's a little different. It's not totally different than the data that we typically reference. All right. And it talks about changes workers request are made to do their job better and challenges in finding and maintaining employment. All right. So that's today's episode. And it's grounded in this federal data that, I think it's pretty reliable because the amount of responses they get, the fact that it's across so many different geographies and, all the different demographic breakdowns are represented. So really probably the most accurate information we have. And the BLS estimates, it jives with other estimates that we have on disability employment, by the way. This BLS estimate is 30.7 million Americans ages 16 to 75 have a health condition or difficulty that limits work. All right. That's around 12.4% of the population of that age range. All right. So this is then larger than a disability conversation, although it's inclusive of people with disabilities. This is really a work and economy conversation. This involves so many people. It's such a significant amount of the population. And so let's talk about what the BLS measured and how they defined it. And really using this current population survey, they measured the specific concept of people who say a health condition or difficulty limits the kind or amount of work that they can do. All right. So now a couple of disclaimers there. Yeah, it's self-reported. All right. And again, the ranges are a little bit different than we typically do. So, but this was a special thing done to be able to include, I guess, a larger cohort. All right. So it also reports a separate concept called disability based on a functional limitation and puts forward questions on those. And so these measures overlap and are not identical to some of the things that we typically cite here on this program, but it's okay. About half of the 30.7 million, so around 15 million, also meet the CPS definition of disability. So again, I think because of that, we're talking about a very large amount of individuals here. I think there's a pretty good understanding that this data is going to be very valid and it's probably going to be the best measure that we have. All right. And unfortunately, it looks to the same labor market gap that the other surveys and other data that we've referenced and continue to reference points to. So I think that, in a good way supports the data. In a bad way, the data is still the data and these gaps still exist. So the labor force participation rate in this survey was around 27.1% for people with a work limiting condition, as compared to 74.7% for people without one. All right. The employment to population ratio was 24.3 versus 71.4. The unemployment rate was 10.5 versus 4.3. So these are not small differences. These are major structural divides. And again, they jive and support the data that's typically reported monthly in many of those surveys that we go over. All right, let's shift gears a little, get actually into the long-term challenge here. So the BLS found that in this study that around 84.5% of people with a work-limiting condition expected it to last more than 3 months. All right. So that points to ongoing barriers. That points to these are long-term, lasting situations. These are not temporary or transient things. So they most likely are going to meet all of the definitions of disability, and which means now we're talking about substantial limitations and, depending upon what program or which tool we're using to measure, is it the ACS, is it the ADA definition, all of those different things. But I guess the point is these are not people who otherwise wouldn't be counted. So, remember many episodes back, and we're going to do a renewal episode, by the way, where we go over all of the various programs and their various definitions and how those definitions then count certain amounts of people. This then is probably one of the wider and more pervasive, and in a way, then that makes it more substantive because it's so inclusive of all of these various health conditions, okay, of which people with disabilities are most likely falling into. So what kind of conditions most often limit the work? I thought this was probably the most interesting part of the report to me. And they asked, what type of condition is limiting work? Well, the most common category reported was mobility impairment, and that impacted around 5.4% of the 16 to 70-year-old population, or about 13 million people, okay? Other reported categories include other health conditions at 3.6, mental health at 1.4, cognitive, intellectual, and learning at 1, and visual and hearing impairment at under 1. I think it was like 6.6%. So that mix matters because it tells us the solutions can't be a one-size-fits-all. So we need to look at what we talked about, reasonable accommodations. And I guess I'm foreshadowing a little bit here, but the on-the-job reality is that there are difficulties to doing the job, and that's what's keeping these people out of the labor force, number one. And then when they are in the labor force, out of, at higher rates of unemployment or being employed and then having to leave the job because they can't be accommodated or because they can't do the essential functions of the job. All right. So let's go to some of the data here. Among people who are employed, 39.4% of those work with a work limiting condition, reporting challenges that make it difficult to do their job at their highest level. Okay. That's very significant. Only 1.6% of workers without a work limiting condition reported that. So you can see that for people with these health limiting conditions, these people with disabilities oftentimes, that nearly 40% of them are saying they could do their job better if the job was tweaked in a certain way, if they were accommodated a certain way, whereas only 2% report that people without disabilities report that they could do their job better, right? So it's like, that to me is compelling. So when 4 in 10 people are saying, I'm struggling to do this job as structured, the labor market gap then starts to make sense. And, oftentimes when I'm speaking with large organizations that Archangel Communications is trying to assist on this, whether it be corporations, public sector, doesn't matter. Like, people without disabilities, it kind of dawns on them like, oh, what do you mean? All we need to do is be able to, why didn't you tell us? And then they're more than willing oftentimes to tweak the job or carve the job, or what can we do? Or can we buy you a piece of equipment or telework, or, whatever the case may be. All right. So when people request changes and not drama, okay, because that's oftentimes what people without disabilities think it's going to be like, oh, it's going to be this major. Nobody wants drama. Just get it done. This is just part of a workday, providing these reasonable accommodations. So, we talk about the solutions all the time. Here's a data point that I think really highlights it. The BLS found that 32% of workers with a work-limited condition had ever requested or made a change to do their job better. All right? Compare that to around 3.4% of workers without a work-limiting condition. So these workers with these health-limiting conditions, 32-something% of them are saying to their employer, hey, I've got a way, I'm proposing a way to make this better. Not only for me, but for the organization, right? Whereas only less than 4% of workers without that condition are speaking up. Again, just goes like, this is out of necessity. This is not like some wishful thinking or something. This is like, help me help you. And the most common changes were very practical. We're talking about things like changing the schedule of the work. That was like 48% of the time. Changing specific tasks, 36% of the time. Telework, around 18% of the time. New or modified equipment, around 17% of the time. Now, although the data doesn't say what most people need, in particular, so we can't break it down, each one of those situations is going to be specific. It does indicate that people are often seeking to improve their position to be able to make work better for them, but also then the company. This is a win-win when it's done well. It helps the employer, helps the employee. And employers often grant these reasonable accommodations requests. And here is a part that should lower the expectation among employers who think that this is going to be like a big deal or a cost. All right. Among wage and salary workers who requested changes, many requests were fully granted, and they have data on that. All right. Telework was granted around 70% of the time. Equipment was granted around 68% of the time. Work task modifications were granted around 66% of the time. So this is proof that these situations are curable. And like, if it was such a burden to the employers, they wouldn't be granting them at such high rates. So that's a good thing. That means that the reasonable accommodation process, the interactive process, is working, and that people are being accommodated. And again, that's benefiting both the employer and the employee. So what's a clear takeaway here? If you remember one thing, I would say that having flexibility, both on the employer side and the employee side, getting into that interactive process to reach that reasonable accommodation, whether it's schedule flexibility, task design, tools and equipment, the expectations. This is one of the brilliant things about the ADA, is that it's merit-based, is that you must be able to do the essential functions of the job, the essential job duties. Okay, so that's really one of the biggest barriers, is convincing the employer that, look, we're not asking you to just invent a job here. No, we're asking you to just tweak it, just craft it, just carve it, whatever you want to call it, but just adjust it in a way that makes it work for your worker, who you have time and energy and resources invested in. You don't want to let that person walk out the door. No, it's much easier to just accommodate that person. Again, that works better for the employer, and it certainly works better for the employee. All right. So I thought this report was important because it does bring real data in here, and it shows that this can work. All right. That the reasonable accommodation process can work. And it's a larger thing, by the way, with this health conditions. All right. And I wanted to make sure we pointed that. So for employers, I would say start with the default posture of how can we make this more workable? Like what deal can be had here? And for the employee, it's, well, I want to be able to work and be as productive as possible and, be upwardly mobile and all that. All right. So when a change is needed, the most common ask is one of the most frequently granted things. And that is whatever works for your situation, whether it be the ask for telework, the ask for equipment, most reasonable accommodations. We've done episodes on this. The latest is, I think it's under $500. So we're not talking about like huge expenses here. All right. So this can be done. And we can improve the situation for both employees and employers, for our overall economy, for people with disabilities, for America. It can be a win-win-win. And if you want more on this, we'll put the link to this particular report. This report is interesting. It does back up everything we've been saying. And shout out to the people at the Office of Disability Employment Policy. We're going to put in a request, see if we can get one of them on an upcoming episode here to go further into this. All right. So, but it's David Darkangelo, another episode of Save Visibility. And I hope you have a great day.
For more information about disability employment issues, please visit our website, disabilityemploymentsolutions.com. The Save As Ability podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel at Disability Policy Expert, or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribe, stream, rate, and review our shows. Your ratings and reviews help our show reach new audiences. Produced by Pod Pro Entertainment. Save As Ability lives within a network of podcasts located at podproentertainment.com. #TheNewRadio. Again, my name is David Darkangelo, and I'm your disability policy expert. Until next time, thank you. I hope you have a great day.